Uh, Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly interview series. Today, I'm joined by the Winston Cup Series Museum founder, Will Spencer. Will, how are you doing?
Doing good today on this Monday, Martin Luther King Day.
Yes, sir. I guess first, the best place to start is how did you first get involved with the sport?
Oh, they make TV shows about it now. I was a weekend warrior. And back in the 70s, I had a good friend, still a really good friend. We travel to England and go to Goodwood and race the cars. Danny Lawrence, he works for RCR. So Danny and I worked at the local Chevrolet dealership, Modern Chevrolet, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And in that time frame while I was working at Modern, I always wanted to get a job at Reynolds as a show car driver because they were the series sponsor, which started in 1971. And
Hmm.
I tried for a couple of years, and Danny came to me one day and said he was going to leave and go work for Lou LaRosa, which was Richard Childress' engine builder, became Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s engine builder, and Danny became Dale Earnhardt's engine builder after Lou retired or moved on. I don't remember which one it was. But in that process, I met a friend, Bobby Moody, and Danny. Well, it was Bobby Moody that was part of the Flying Aces. He was the body man for the Wrangler car, and Ed Barrier was driving and working at RCR down on Gumtree Road, and Ed, I became friends, and he was an up and coming driver, and he'd been driving the Baby Grand Series, and he had one car and a dream, and I always thought about driving, and then I realized, well, somebody's got to go sell it, and somebody's got to drive. I figured, well, I'd be the better seller, and Ed would be the better driver. So it started. Our friendship started about 1986, 87. I met Richard in 76 when he had a little shop on Walltown Street. Um, it was pretty much a one-man show, and all his friends were volunteers, and that's just a hop, skip, and a jump where JKS is. So I left Modern in 83 and didn't really know what I was going to do. And I rented the building that we're in here on Liberty Street back in 83, bought it in 84, and started JKS. And through a period of time right there in 83, 84, because I had followed the Winston Cup Series sponsorship and wanted a job working for Reynolds in their sports marketing. It's called SME.
Hmm.
When I started JKS, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, so I named it after my dad, John Carr Spencer, Kerr. And I didn't want it to be Pacific. So Jeff Bird, he was a manager at Reynolds over the Winston Cup Series and some other programs, which he ended up becoming the CEO at Bristol Motor Speedway. He passed away about a decade ago. And I went in there with some pictures, and just to kind of give you a long story short of things that I was doing at JKS, it was some signage and things, marketing pieces. He said, well, Will, you can do anything we want. So really the first thing I did for Reynolds was in 1984 when they announced the Winston at the Reynolds building. And Jerry Long was the CEO of Reynolds, and he put a couple $1 million behind that program, and they had started the series sponsorship in 1971, which was a decade later after when I got involved. But my first race was 1971 at Rockingham with a friend of mine, dad, who worked at Reynolds, had gotten free tickets, and we went and camped out, and I was hooked ever since I was 11 years old. And kind of the rest of it's history. It evolved. We did the Winston Cup sponsorship for 25 years. We did the Nextel Sprint sponsorship for 13 years, and that was pretty much the show cars, the track activation. We supported Nationwide in the Nationwide series, the Craftsman Truck series. We did Camping World. A lot of the sponsors through those decades spent a lot of money because of, I guess, what we call today, we're not as connected today as weren't as connected as we were back then as we are
Mhm.
now. So it's a whole different media of how it delivers. So it's been an amazing ride and amazing sport.
Yeah, that's what's cool because I feel like a lot of people now, even on our Instagram page, recently I had posted a thing about like, where were you when Earnhardt passed away? And it's weird because there's so many people on there that are like 18 or younger. And they're like, oh man, like I remember being a baby, when Jimmy
Right.
won his first championship or whatever. And, for me growing up, we didn't have our websites to go to. We didn't have all this NASCAR content. So no, even like those show cars, we would like my dad would stop by the school. We'd get out early just so we could go up to the Walmart and go see Harvick's car, or go up and
Right.
see Earnhardt or Gordon's car somewhere, because that was, at that point when you're 2.5 hours from Charlotte, that's the taste of NASCAR you get, is just, oh, here's a random show car at this
Right.
place. And yeah, just as a kid, those show cars, that was like Christmas right there. And you didn't meet a driver. That's what I tell people. It's like you didn't meet a driver. You literally just walked up and said, "There's the race car." And if you were lucky,
Right.
you'd get a hero card or whatever. But
Or a hat or a
yeah.
keychain. Yeah. So a lot of what we did through the decades, and we still do, like we're getting a Napa car ready for this year. We're not really sure how much it's going to go out. We have a Goodyear show car. It's changed, but the deliverable of what you were saying, having a
Mhm.
car come to the store, or the agent, if it's a nationwide agent, or even a Lowe's Hardware. We did Lowe's for over 25 years.
Mhm.
Through the origination of their sponsorship was handled by uh, Reynolds Sports Marketing,
Oh, wow.
and was Junior Johnson's sponsor. Um, so the pieces of the museum, even back to the early days when we started, as things got outdated, we had a shared warehouse with
Mhm.
Reynolds. They didn't charge me to park, and I didn't charge them to store their, their giveaways. And we looked after the Winston Cup Series tracks, the Winston Races Series tracks. It expanded to the drag racing, and then we did other programs, the Camel programs, Camel GT, Camel Supercross, Salem, Salem. They were always very creative, and over that 33-year history, they, you know, they were partners. And I guess one of the things you had sent me, what was memorable about that 33 years? Well, it was Reynolds did everything first class. They
Mhm.
supported their tracks, whatever division it was in. They did the banquets, and they spent $1 billion over a
Yeah.
33-year period to do the most innovative things that we could do. We did the Winston, the Noble 5 programs, which went on for 5 years. There were so many things that they were always wanting to make things better, and
Mhm.
they did a great job.
Yeah, I guess, kind of expanding on that, can you tell us a little bit about what was the Winston's entry into NASCAR? And I guess, just looking back at how some of those, the impacts they had on the sport are still stuff that's remembered today. I think people forget how many of those things, like you said, were from, Winston or collaboration.
Right. Well, I think when you look at the 33-year history and what they did and how they started, and they were running, when they took over the series, they were running Friday night, Saturday night, and they cut the schedule back to plus or minus 30 races.
Mhm.
They created the point system in a better way, where it was, you know, a big prize at the end. And they supported, wherever they were, if they were at Rockingham or Darlington or Wilkesboro or Martinsville, they didn't only sponsor the series, but they gave and built suites and
Mhm.
better flag stands, and they gave them the paint to paint everything red and white. I mean, it was a big, whether, whatever time it was of the year, the year never, everybody always thought that we got off at the last race,
Mhm.
like in Atlanta, and we didn't do anything till Daytona. Well, it was the tide coming in and going out. In September, we were already planning for what we were going to start in January,
Mm-hmm.
or what we were going to basically have to start working on in November for the following season, whether it was for the teams or the sponsors. And, we had Goodies headache powders, which was a great sponsor. Texas Pete.
Mm-hmm.
You've had some Texas Pete before, I know.
Yeah.
Hot sauce, yeah. So there were a lot of local sponsors. Piedmont Airlines was a sponsor of Terry Labonte's, also Richard Childress. So they brought a lot of local sponsors that started. You had Haynes, and there were all these local I won't say Fortune 500 companies that got
Yeah.
involved in the sport. And then that, you had Lowe's, like I said earlier, but they all started following, and then it became, it was a Southern sport that, moved west over time. And then you had, Midwest and Western drivers that pretty much came east.
Yeah.
And if they came east, then it kind of did the reverse. The sport went west, other than we had Riverside.
Now for us, for me, I went, growing up, we'd always go to the race shops and all, but as far as like attending my first actual race, it wasn't until 2006. So by that time, Nextel had already came in. And I guess this wasn't one of the questions I sent, but it's one thing that with you bringing up with Winston and all, I've heard a lot of people talk about how they felt like at the end of it, people didn't even associate it with Winston cigarettes. Because I know even as a kid, like I know I wasn't being marketed to with cigarettes, but even for me, whenever they went away, I was like, oh wait, that's cigarettes. I always thought that was just the name, or if it was named after someone.
Right.
Around 2002, 2003, was that anything to do, or is it still like oh no, for the most part people knew Winston cigarettes? Was it?
No, I think the drivers, the teams, the associate sponsors, and all the series had great respect for Reynolds, because Reynolds always included whoever in whatever they were doing. They wanted it. They knew that if the more sponsors they got within the series, the better the series would be, and they were always thinking open. It's like Junie Donlevy out of Richmond that owned the Dunleavy Racing there on Midlothian Pike Road. Junie was a great man. He told me 3 decades ago, or almost 3 decades ago, he said, "Will, you'll have 43 drivers with 43 sponsors, but you're only ever going to have 10 stars. And those 10 sponsors want to have one of those drivers to be the star." But that was never the case, but it took 43 cars to make a field. And yes, there were 10 that were the stars. So you had the other 30 some, 33, I don't know, 33 that made up the field. And every now and then, Junie won under, I think it was Benny Parsons with the Trucks More sponsorship. His one race. Wendell Scott, independent driver over 500 races with really no sponsor, won one race. Junior Johnson had a great career. He won 50 races and became a car owner. Richard Childress never really, I don't think Richard won a race. Don't forgive me for that if you did, Richard, in the NASCAR series. And then he was smart to transition from a driver to a car owner. And created a mega racing empire. And we were able to support, whether it was Junior or RCR. I mean, one of the biggest things that we did that changed what, action performance and the souvenirs was Richard Childress did the 25th anniversary silver car that Dale unveiled for the Winston. And that was the first special paint scheme car. And that, changed everything. Richard Petty had retired before that, and you had the little cars, and it was all the different paint schemes, the little 124th cars. But that was the evolution of changing the marketing of branding. And you had Wheaties car and the Peter Max car, etc. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's cool when you look back at that, because like I said, I think people nowadays, when it comes to NASCAR, you've got you can spend 24 hours and there's, hundreds of people doing what I'm doing, interviewing with
Right.
NASCAR. There's so much content out there. It's so easy to go hop on eBay, Lionel, Plan B sales or whatever. But people forget back in those days how creative you had to be because, like I remember I had to go to Walmart and try to search to find that certain die cast. I couldn't just
Right.
go online and pre-order,
Right.
or whatever. I know I got a press kit one time from our local Napa Auto Parts, and I went home thinking it was the coolest thing because I was like, here, I got a poster of Waltrip and Brendan Gaughan. I've got these little fact cards about Michael Waltrip, and I'm like, those were things I couldn't just pull up and say, oh, let me look at Waltrip's story. It was, I have to read, these hero cards to find out about this guy and all. So it's hard because I can ramble on about activation because I'm a sucker for all of that, all of that stuff from the
Right.
90s and early 2000s. I guess moving on though, when did the idea for the museum first come about?
In 2001 and 2, Reynolds had changed the direction, and they were looking at, what happened to most companies in the early 2000s was to be responsible to the stockholder. So they were looking at ways to be more effective and cost effective, and they ended up merging or preliminary merging with Brown and Williams Tobacco Company. That was one of the things that they were doing, and we had unfortunately had stopped the Winston Racing Series right there. They had changed the age limit for tobacco and things, and it was a crossover there for the date. You had to be 18 or older or whatever, and it was the age limits pieces changing, so it just wasn't fitting where it was, under the master settlement agreement, the MSA, where the tobacco companies had to pay, Philip Morris, all of them had to pay damages, and they had picked up the series sponsorships because they had, been excluded from TV in the 60s. So they had a 3-decade run with that. So over the years and over the decades that I had done the rental sponsorship, plus all the other things that we had done, I always said, when it got outdated, I always say, take it to the warehouse. I'm going to do a museum one day. And that was a joke. I mean, it was kind of like, and then it became in 2002 when I knew that 2003 was the last year, and we did the victory lap tour with all the champions cars, and we took them to Bristol or Martinsville, wherever they won, or whatever track was specific to that driver. Of the, I believe there was 18, don't hold me to that, 18 champions through that 33 years, might have been, or 15. Need to count the cars at the 1/64 scale cars at the museum, or 1/25 scale cars at the museum. But I knew that it was going to be the end, and we really didn't know what was going to happen as far as a new sponsor and what was going to come in. And Nextel arrived June, July of 2003, and had made a deal with NASCAR to replace Winston as the sponsor, and that was great. And so yeah, I had all these things and all the memorabilia pieces, the photographs, the things that, because Reynolds was going through the transition, I spent 2003 working with Reynolds for the things that needed to be preserved and not end up in a dumpster. Not because they wanted it to, it was just to change the time.
Yeah.
And I decided that somewhere in there, I said something to Richard Childerson, said, what can I do with all these things? And he said, do a museum. So I got with the city of Winston, and we looked at a bunch of different places, and actually the building that the museum settled in was an old Bob Neal Pontiac car dealership that had been bought by the city of Winston, and I bought it from them, and it's 12,000 square feet. But then the big thing came is how do you display 33 years of history?
Mm-hmm.
So I did the mural on the wall, and it pretty much, the mural depicts what year, where somebody was, but how you ended up on the wall depended on what may have happened a decade later or what may have happened a decade
Mm-hmm.
earlier. Um, so there were a lot of great pieces that we had, and I had done the NASCAR Thunder Stores for TNN, and they got bought by TNT, and there were like 13 of them, and I had cars that I had bought. They always said that, you know, they wreck them on Sunday, we would buy them on Monday. A lot of cars I bought were never wrecked. Like
Mm-hmm.
the Winston 23 car, which is a Winston No Bull, ran in '97 at Atlanta, that introduced the Winston brand when Camel left.
Mm-hmm.
They ran the last race, and then Jimmy Spencer, then it went to a Taurus in '98. So that car, I told Travis, we were in Atlanta, I said, Jimmy didn't wreck that car, I want it. Because they weren't going to run it at '98 anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just like it was when it came off the track.
Wow.
Probably one of the few that Jimmy didn't wreck or had lots of tire marks. The Camel car I bought from Junior, Colbert Seagrave's, Ralph Seagrave's son, who was working for Junior. I bought it from them, and then a couple of years later, I ended up buying a motor from Junior that C.B. Raines built, was supposedly the last motor built in Eagle Hollow. That's now in a Camel Thunderbird that Jimmy drove. It was a speedway car. So a lot of it came together. I got a Bill Elliott car that he raced at Richmond in the night race.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of cars, whether it was Wood Brothers or RCR or Hendricks or whoever, that were phased out, or we bought them and used them for a program. I had Bobby Labonte 3 years ago in England driving an Interstate Batteries car I bought from Joe Gibbs Racing. They hadn't been started in 20 years. So they're fun things to still have. There's 50 some cars associated with the museum.
Wow. Out of all those cars, or I guess just also the other memorabilia, is there a favorite item of yours, or a couple of items that are your favorite when you go through the museum?
I think the early period, there's two earlier period cars. There's the '70 Dodge Daytona that Richard Petty drove at Miami to close the Winston sponsorship,
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of the drivers signed it under the hood, and it was the old Goody show car, and it's been a great piece and a statement to the ending that 33 years. And you know, Reynolds tasked me with how do we end 33 years of sponsorship?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what better way? You know, the Dodge Daytona with the King driving,
Mm-hmm.
and he led, you know, Matt Kenseth around the track. There's a '71 Mercury Cyclone that I found that was Wendell Scott's. Was pretty much the last car he owned and drove in the Winston 500 when they had an 18 car pileup in the first 10 laps. And it's like somebody says, you restore it. I said, well, no, it's kind of like the Titanic. Would you restore the Titanic?
Yeah.
But it's a great car. I think all the cars, whether it's a Richard Petty 43 car or Kyle Petty 42 Silver Bullet car, an Ed Barrier number 90 car, or a Dale Earnhardt number 3 car, or Gary Labonte. I think they all have, you know, specific history to the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to like, I'm a steward, and Christy says I'm a hoarder of cars, but I'm not. But I really have over the past decade kind of gone through what had history, what didn't have history, and passed on other cars to other people to do other things with that didn't have any history. Because you know, you can't keep them all. But I think the museum itself is, for me, preserve that history. And I knew that if I didn't do it with the trophies and the memorabilia and the photographs and the cars, that once it was dismantled,
Mm-hmm.
you'd never be able to put it all back together again. But I think the coolest thing is there's still cars that show up. You know, somebody will call has an old Cox wood preservative car that Ed drove, or they
Hmm.
call him, and there's a car that, you know, Junior's looking. There was a car that Senior had drove. That's one of the things I know. Junior's trying to find the Busch Series type cars, or the cars
Hmm.
that were built by Senior prior to, the Cup year.
Yeah. Yeah, that to me, it was cool because we recently last year we got to go through one of the museums over in the Charlotte area, and the first time I went through it was just me and my wife, and about half the stuff in there I was like, oh, this is cool, but all the stuff I was like, I don't know that driver, so it didn't really mean
Right,
anything to me. But we ended up going back up there and doing a project with them, and it was cool because once we got with one of the people from the museum, literally just every car I was like, pick out some of your favorite cars." And he went through one line and he was like, "Just these 5 cars alone, here's the story behind them." And it at that point, the whole museum just came alive because I'm like, here I am
right,
going over and thinking, "Oh, here's Earnhardt, or here's Stewart, or here's a petty car." But here he is saying, "Oh, well, this car's important because this guy ran this race, but he gave this guy a job, and that's how,
right, and
Del
that's
Jarrett, got into the sport." And I'm just like, so people forget is every item has a story, a part in the history of Winston, NASCAR, and all that.
right. I mean, I have it's loaned to Talladega, the Dale Jarrett's last ride where he drove at the All Star race at Charlotte,
Oh,
and
really?
it's the only COT I have with a win. But I loaned it to Talladega. They didn't have, but we've loaned. I got a Dale Jr. Budweiser car that we did that. It was a True Music car, and we loaned it to the Guggenheim for 6 months, and they kept it a year and a half,
Mhm.
which was kind of cool. So we loan them out and to be able to have them. And now with museums, unfortunately, and of all types, are closed or limited
Yeah.
because of COVID. You know, where, and that is a big concern. Where are museums going to be
Mhm.
in the next year or two or three, or even the next decade? Is it going to be more, everything will be more virtual, and that's where you got to be. I'm going to have to be creative to be
Yeah.
able, to keep all this stuff together and figure out, do we do a TV show, or do we do, more mobile pieces with them,
Mhm.
and follow the COVID guidelines. I really don't know. It is a concern though.
Mhm. I guess finally, we keep talking about all the, everything has that story, and you see where, this happens and it starts that chain reaction and all. But for you, whenever folks leave your museum, what is something you want them to take away from that experience?
Um, I read a lot of. We have a comment book, and it's great to read what everybody leaves or whatever. But I think one of the greatest pieces, the majority of them say, "Thank you for preserving the history of that era." A lot of them say that's when racing was racing. Well, racing's racing before the Winston era and after the Winston era. I think the Winston era itself, and NASCAR, commend them for being the first live sport back on TV. They moved mountains to do that. Before basketball and football. So I think seeing people's reaction, their appreciation for the 33 years being preserved, their appreciation of what Reynolds did for that 33 years. And I think a lot of the drivers now, Jeff Gordon's retired, Clint Boyd's retired, and we do a lot of, JKS does a lot of things for the Hall of Fame. We help them with their exhibits and stuff, and they're minimally back open and doing some things as well, private tours and private parties, and you're still limited to that. But I think that's preserving that history and knowing that Christy let me do that and look at me every now and then. What are you doing? But it's still fresh. It looks good, um, and I'm just appreciative that people still want to come even when it's closed. We do private tours. We're still doing that. We get 2 or 3 requests a week wanting to know when we're open. So it's nice that people care. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that we found too that like Ed and I raced 299 races together in the truck series, the Busch series, the Cup series, the ARCA series, and some, you know, late model stock stuff. And, but since COVID, his fan mail has increased by 75 to 80%. I mean, we get 3 or 4 envelopes a week here. We get them in the welcome facility. We get them down, and he gets them down on Shady Grove Church Road where the original race shop was, which is people, I guess, are going through their drawers and finding these things. But it's that reaction that people are looking for content. They're looking for something to do because everybody's so confined.
Yes, sir. Well, if people want to learn more about the museum, where can they find you online?
It's Winston Cup. What's the best way? It's
www.winstoncupmuseum.com.
Yeah, just the www.winstoncupmuseum.com is the best.
And we also have Facebook.
Yeah, that's what I was which one I said. So you got Facebook and
Instagram.
And Instagram. All the things I don't do. I'll let Christian do most of that with
social media.
For social media. Social media.
It sounds good. From what I've experienced, I think the further you stay away from social media, usually the happier you are. So that.
Yeah, you know, I think I love reading. You know, they send me stuff, and I love reading. You know, when they'll post something for the museum, like Throwback Thursday, and the responses they get, and they'll do the little quiz and different pieces.
And it's actually the social media for the Winston Cup Museum. You'd just be amazed at how much traffic we get. I mean, we are amazed at the numbers, particularly the trivia. I mean, people want to they want to engage, they want to be a part of it. I think that's, even with, you know, a decline in people coming to the museum over the years, the social media interest has just increased. So it's fascinating.
I think, you know, museums are, and it depends on tourism and what's going on and what, you know, what year it is, you know, if you've got, and how the weather is, you know, like you got Martinsville, it's close, or, you know, people are traveling to Darlington. You pick up a lot of people and they, you know, how did you hear about it or whatever? And they say, well, we're going to the Hall of Fame. We're going to Richard Childress's, you know, museum, or we're going to Hendrix or whatever. So it really depends. And one of the things that was kind of like, we had boosted a whole lot of different things and started in the 17 for 18, that it had picked up so much traction in 19, you know, that we wrote Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and doing the event piece, to where when COVID came, to see that hard work, because it takes 18 months. It takes 2 years to get that social media piece going, to watch it just stop. I mean, I watched all our programs for JKS, you know, 7 days. We were, I know this is kind of off subject, but we were at Atlanta. We were loading for the Dixie 400 in Miami. We had basketball in Greensboro and 5K runs and cars out for like Napa at the convention center for their, you know, their annual program, and everything just stopped in 7 days. So the side effect of that is just like, what just happened? You know, so hopefully things will come back in the coming year.
We hope to. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.